Like as a highly neurotic 14-year-old, I've been like, okay, we sit down, we do our homework, we get our good grades,
Yeah.
and then we're going to be rewarded with the dream job. And I was like, this is not the dream.
Wow.
And I had no idea how I was going to get to the dream. It seemed impossible.
Today we're joined by Shalene Gupta, who is amazing, one of my favorite writers. She has written The Power of Trust, The Cycle. She's an editor at Fast Company on work life, and she's had bylines before in a number of publications, including The Atlantic. Shalene, thank you so, so much for joining.
Thanks for having me, Joy. Super excited to be here.
Yay, amazing. So you have been killing it as a writer, and I imagine that when you were growing up, you probably knew at an early age, but correct me if I'm wrong, that you wanted to be a writer. What did you see as your future for your career? Was it a job? Was it something else?
Oh my gosh, I was so stressed out about this. I remember when I went to the pediatrician when I was 14. I think at that point they tend to send in a mental health counselor just to do a wellness check. And she was like, how are you doing? And I was like, I am a 14-year girl in America. How do you think I'm doing? And she's like, okay, that is fair. And she's like, what are you stressed about? I was like, what am I going to be when I grow up? I know that I want to be a writer, but I don't know anyone who has a job as a writer. I don't understand how this makes money. And she was just like, I think you're a little young for this. Are you okay? And I was like, I am not okay.
Oh my gosh, it's so real.
And she was just, I think she just decided that I had a very intense personality and she needed to leave the room, which was probably the fair thing to do. But it was this lingering question that I had because from a young age, I knew that I loved reading and I wanted to be paid to read, but I didn't actually understand how that worked. And so I was like, second best is writing. And then I was like, I don't know how to turn this into a career. I have no idea.
Wow, that's so early. I didn't know you when I was 14, but I think we would have had a lot in common back then.
Joy.
Highly neurotic and ahead of the game.
Was I ahead of the game? I don't know. Because now I could have enjoyed being 14 and instead I wasted it.
Oh, well, we had our quarter life crisis young, so. Okay, so you didn't know how you were going to make money. You knew you wanted to be a writer, and it was not the kind of job that came to a career fair and said, if you apply to this job, you will have a successful career as a writer. So how did it unfold? How did you go from knowing you wanted to be a writer but not knowing what the job looked like to figuring it out in those first few years?
It was tough. Oh my goodness. So I remember I was a writing major in college with sort of this feeling of we're going to figure this out. And then I graduated early during the recession, which at the time, before the recession had hit, I was like, this is a great idea. I was saving on a year of tuition. And then the recession hit and I was like, ooh.
Oh.
So no one was hiring. So forget about dream jobs. I just wanted a job.
Yeah.
And I felt really lucky. I was the only one in my cohort that year in my group of friends to get a job. I was the only one. My friends the next year graduated and I was still the only one who had a job. So I landed a job at the Department of Treasury, writing white papers on how the government moves its money around. And, bless my boss. I remember he sat me down. He was like, you know how to write. That's great. I can't teach you how to write. I can teach you how the government handles its money. And I was like, okay, great. I was so grateful to be employed and have a big girl job with a salary and benefits.
Yeah.
At the same time, it was not necessarily what I'd pictured. I was the youngest person in the building. Truly, we are talking about a gray 1950s style bunker with gray cubicles.
Whoa.
And then literally, I was on the phone with bankers and talking to government officials about how does the government move its money around. And I started to panic because this was not the life I had envisioned. As a highly neurotic 14-year-old, I've been like, okay, we sit down, we do our homework, we get our good grades, and then we're going to be rewarded with the dream job. And I was like, this is not the dream.
Wow.
And I had no idea how I was going to get to the dream. It seemed impossible. So I took kind of a two-pronged approach. One was I just knew that I needed to get better at writing. And so every day after work, I'd come home and I had read that Malcolm Gladwell said you need 10,000 hours to become an expert. So I was like, I gotta fit that in. So every day I would write for 3 hours after work.
Wow.
On weekends, I would try to squeeze in 6 hours. I had a spreadsheet to get
Oh
to
my
my
gosh.
10,000 hours. And then in the meanwhile, I was just trying to search for other ways to get closer to jobs where I would be writing more to hit my 10,000 hours. One of my friends ended up getting a Fulbright, and I was like, oh my God, I'd love to be able to just go abroad. And so I applied for a Fulbright, and then I got one.
Wow. Wait, so that's incredible. I have so many questions even on just that. First, fill us in. What was the dream? If this was not the dream job, I know being paid to read is the ultimate dream, and one day we'll figure that one out. But what did writing look like as a dream job for you, if you could have it however you wanted?
Here's the thing. I couldn't even picture it. I just knew that I wanted to write all day and I wanted to be paid, but I had no idea what the different types of jobs were out there. Like I barely knew the difference between PR, marketing, journalism, publishing. So it was really vague and hazy. And I barely knew anyone in my social circle. Like anytime there was an opportunity to meet a writer, I would just try and get a coffee with them and ask like, how did you do this? But even then, the jobs they had of like working in newspapers, magazines, it just seemed impossible to me. I didn't have connections. I didn't have the family knowledge. My family, like I come from a family of immigrants. They are lawyers, doctors, engineers, and scientists. My dad is the black sheep who became a scientist, and that was like, what are you
Yeah.
doing?
Yeah, no, those are kind of the big three in our community. And science was never mentioned, only applied sciences as engineers or doctors. So,
Oh, it was a huge deal when he was like, I'm going into physics.
wow. Well, good for him for blazing the trail. But okay, so it was kind of unknown how these jobs for writers unfold. I know there were things in movies, like I remember How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days was set in a magazine, and magazine jobs kind of existed, but they were out of reach, and kind of the path to getting there was unknown. So you're getting your 10,000 hours of writing in, and you're tracking it on the spreadsheet, and you get in to the Fulbright. Where does that lead you on your writing journey?
And so, my very naive thought had been like, great, I have a year abroad. I applied for the teaching one because I didn't have a research project. And I was like, I will teach and then maybe I'll just fall in love with teaching and then be able to support myself. So I hated teaching. It stressed me out.
It's hard. It's really hard.
It's really hard. Teenagers are brutal. Like, if your class is not going well, they are not going to sugarcoat it.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, this is not going well. But whenever there was a writing opportunity, I would put my hand up for it. So the local newspaper needed articles. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, like I have this cohort of Fulbright teachers. It was a very newsworthy event at the time. Malaysia had just unrolled the program. It was very large. So it was like an endless amount of ideas. My English skills in Southeast Asia gave me a huge leg up, whereas I think in America it was much more competitive. So I was suddenly able to get articles placed in the Malaysian national newspaper, the Jakarta Post in Indonesia. And at the end of my Fulbright, I got hired to write a coffee table book on the history of the Fulbright. And it occurred to me, like, I am loving interviewing people. Why don't I try journalism school? So I applied having never really read a newspaper other than The Economist, having no idea what it would mean. And I got in and I kind of just got there with the sort of like, I was like, I want to be a novelist, but here I am, and I hope this isn't a terrible gamble. And I just really ended up falling in love with journalism school, the process of interviewing people. I love hearing about people talking about their jobs and what they do, and writing about it. And right after journalism school, I got a job at Fortune. So I know journalism school gets a huge knock, but I think for people who don't necessarily have the network, the family culture, it can be a huge boost.
Yeah, absolutely. And did you get your 10,000 hours in before journalism school? I know you for sure have them by now.
Oh my God, I don't know. As I started getting more side gigs and assignments, I stopped worrying about that 10,000 hours and just
Yeah.
trying to complete these jobs that I got.
Amazing. Yeah. So you were building the foundation for your life. And it sounds like you had a portfolio career from the very beginning because you had your day job, which was great. And of course, that was a miracle to have gotten that in the recession. And you were, of course, very qualified. So less of a miracle, but more predictable. But so you also had writing that you needed to do outside of work to be able to hone your craft and to figure out where you were going long term. And so those were kind of the makings of the portfolio career. And then when you were in the Fulbright, you also had a bit of a portfolio career going on with the teaching and then placing articles outside in Malaysia, Jakarta Post, etc. When you got to Fortune, was the path starting to converge, or were you starting to accept that maybe the journey of the writer is a portfolio career?
I'd actually never thought of it that way. That's so clever. So I love that framing. I think so. When I got to Fortune, I think there was also this way in which I was so hung up on, but I want to write a book. I want to write a book. And I still go back and forth on this because a Fortune offered to keep me on in their New York office. And I was just kind of like, I'm going to write a book. I want to write a book. Bye.
Yeah.
Which,
yeah, I've been there.
only the folly of youth, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I did write a book, and I think that would have been a lot harder at somewhere with Fortune, which high, fast paced. To stay on top of things, you are working not only the whole week, but you are working on weekends and evenings, and that was part of the reason I left. I was working so hard that I knew I wouldn't be able to write a book if I stayed. And then that's when I really began to portfolio in earnest because there's this trend of like terrible ideas of like, I'm going to like teach for a year. It'll be fine. I'll write the great American novel. I didn't. And then it was, all right, I'll quit Fortune and I'll live on my savings and I'll write the great American novel. It'll be amazing. It was terrible. Within 3 weeks, I had an anxiety attack and was like, I need a part-time job at least.
Yeah.
So I got one. And then, didn't really necessarily enjoy it that much. So it became this path of like looking for other gigs, getting like other side gigs, trading up part-time jobs. And then I end up at Harvard Business School, really just looking to pay my rent, work part-time and write a novel, and actually ended up writing a book with my boss at Harvard Business School by accident.
The power of trust. It's very good. I highly recommend.
Oh, thank you.
Wow. Okay. Yes, that makes a lot of sense, and it really resonates with me. The number of jobs that I have quit to write the great American novel, and I have written books, and they're not good in the fiction realm, at least not yet. So, I mean, having that stability of a job and having that groundedness really allows you to be creative and take on a little bit more adventure and risk in the work that you do for your novel and your writing, at least in my experience. So it totally makes sense to me that when you went to HBS, you were able to kind of accelerate your writing. And then that was really fortuitous that you were able to write it with your boss, and that made so much progress. Now, from where you're sitting, you've gone through this journey of having a full-time job, writing a book through the job, writing the book outside of the job. From where you're sitting, how does the future look to you for how you would want to write a next book?
What does the future look like, Joy? I wish I knew. And I think that's one of the hardest lessons I've been struggling with, because in my early 20s, I was like, within the next 5 or 10 years, I will have this figured out and I will understand what it looks like to have your career and know the next steps. And I was talking to like my older cousins and they were like, that does not happen. And I was like, maybe you're doing it wrong.
Yep.
And now I'm sorry to my cousins.
They were right. Oh,
they
no.
were right. They were right.
Yeah.
I found myself toggling back and forth because I ended up writing a second book and I had to leave my job at HBS just to have the time to do it. I got 1 year to write a nonfiction book, so between the reporting and the writing. And after that year, I burned out. And that was a revelation to me because for the first time in my life, I did not want to write after going full pace for a whole year.
Wow. So what do you do in burnout when your craft is your livelihood?
I spent the whole year playing Stardew Valley, which was terrible.
I don't know what this is, but I need to download it
It's a video
immediately.
game. It was great. I planted like a lot of pixelated radishes.
Sounds so nourishing in a pixelated way.
I mean, I had a freelance gig, so I was using that to kind of keep the lights on. I was lucky I still had advance money, so I didn't have to push as hard. So I would just turn in my, 2 stories a week, and then not really push as hard. I usually have some sort of book project I'm working on, and that was the first time where I was just like, no.
Yeah. Wow. I imagine that might have lined up well with the part of the book writing cycle, which is the promotion cycle. So maybe there were other things to do, but that's really, really hard when you're on empty and you still have to pay rent and you still have to figure all of that out. So, okay, you took this year, this sabbatical radish planting video game year.
I love this framing, Joy. It's so positive. Like, rather than like I was sitting in my pajamas playing Stardew Valley, like writing my like quick hits. Like, hey, I solved rent. Like, that's fine. And now we're just like planting our radishes.
It was not pajamas. It was athleisure. This was.
I'm right, it was athleisure. Joy, it was totally my pajamas.
Tomato, tomato. Okay, so it took a year. I don't think you knew at the beginning that it was going to take a year for you to replenish and to be able to get to a place where you could write the same way again. I mean, with the same amount of energy and enthusiasm as before. How did you come out of it?
I think it was just time. And so around the same time I got pregnant. So the timing was amazing. For those of you who have never been pregnant, I do not recommend it. It was I think pregnancy hits everyone differently, but it definitely hit me with brain fog. And I felt really kind of guilty about it and ashamed until I heard Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie giving a talk. This was like 2 weeks before I went into labor. And she was just like, pregnancy and postpartum was terrible. And she could not write for years because she had such bad brain fog. And at some point she was just like, I don't know if I'll ever write another book. And someone asked, she was like, my advice to people who are pregnant or to young mothers is just give yourself a break. And I was like sitting there in the audience, like 38 weeks pregnant, like, thank you.
Yeah.
So it was nice having that time actually. And then right around the time that I ended up sort of giving birth, I did a terrible thing. I got a job.
Oh,
like I got a full-time job.
I did not see that coming.
I know. And, I was also grateful for it because I felt better about writing. I felt very energetic, but I just didn't have a book idea in me that I felt excited about. I felt like I was at loose ends. And also, to be frank, we live in a society where the numbers are not in favor of mothers. We had an unprecedented number of working mothers drop out of work this year.
Wow.
The statistics show that even when women are earning more than their partners, they still end up doing more of the housework and more of the childcare. And as a freelancer, when I had a book contract, I was extremely good at saying no. But after the book was published, I felt like I didn't necessarily have a northern compass. And that's true because I was also burnt out. So there were ways in which it was just really easy to say yes to a bunch of different things and find myself, doing favors for friends that I maybe normally wouldn't do if I had a pressing project or picking more up the admin tasks. And at the time that was good. I needed that. But I really began to worry about what does it look like to have a child? How do I establish a pattern and routine where if I have trouble on my own as a freelancer, giving myself permission to just think about a book, take time for myself, what does that look like with the child in a society where we tell women they can't do anything for themselves, and if it's between their well-being and someone else's, particularly a child, they always have to pick the child. So I got a job because I thought the external structure would just set the scaffolding for having a career and keeping it. One of my, favorite writers had said that she didn't write for 7 years once she had a kid. And this is like Curtis Sittenfeld. She has had an amazing career. She can do that. I am not Curtis Sittenfeld. I don't know what happens to my contacts, my network, if I take a 7-year break.
It makes perfect sense that having a job would give you that structure and those boundaries to make sure that you continue to write, continue to build your contacts, your craft. That's really, really smart. One of the questions that brings to mind now is, and the answer may very well be, we still don't know and we're still figuring it out. But, back in your 20s, you used to have a job and then you would write 3 hours a day on weekdays and 6 hours a day on weekends. A decade later, with a child, I imagine that's much harder to do. I'm guessing, but tell me if I'm wrong.
So when I got the job, everyone was like, you're nuts. You're in the perfect situation for being a parent. Like, you have flexibility. Like, what are you doing? And I'm going to caveat this with, like, I feel very privileged in that I have two things going for me. One, we can afford daycare. Two, my parents have been amazing and are pretty much just handling so much. Otherwise, this would be a completely different conversation. I know a lot of working mothers are struggling, and I think what we're doing to working parents is cruel and unusual, and frankly, it's like trauma bonding for an entire generation.
Yeah.
And the only reason I'm not in that boat is because of my parents, and I know not everybody has that.
Yeah.
But for my particular situation, it was important to have a job in those boundaries because, I see even now, like on holidays, during my mat leave, suddenly it's all like family, baby, and that it has been really hard to carve out those 3 hours because while I'm able to be like, I have, a boss that I'm reporting to, I have a team that's waiting on me, and I need to be present for those 8 hours a day. Once I'm off the clock, it's really hard to say, I need a few hours to work on a book.
Yeah.
And, you could potentially say this is because I've already been working, over 40 hours a week. But I think this would still hold true even if I wasn't working a full-time job. The conversation just changed radically when I got this job. It went from maybe we'll get, part-time help a few hours a week to like, okay, we need to get daycare.
Yeah.
And it went from my parents being like, oh, we'll visit to like, both of you have full-time jobs. We're going to step in and help you.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you to them. That's incredible. And congratulations on the job. This is a really cool job you have. You're staff editor of Work Life at Fast Company. Of the many cool things about this job is that you get to see a window into other people's careers and kind of these macro trends. You told us a little bit about what it's like for women and for parents, but what are you seeing kind of writ large regarding careers? Are people taking more of a portfolio career approach? Are there certain trends emerging that, might have surprised you?
I'm having a panic attack about the American middle class.
Yes.
We're in a K-shaped economy. You just look at the consumer price index and what's happened to inflation. It's really frightening. The rich are getting richer, and the upper middle class, or what would have been considered the upper middle class, they're not even doing that well. Forget about the middle class. It's bad. And so not only that, with the advent of AI, I think the AI layoffs are somewhat overblown. I think companies are taking layoffs and then being like, oh, it's AI because that looks good to investors. Yeah. But there's a certain amount of just bloated hiring. I've become frightened because it feels like it's gone from layoffs are terrible to companies being like, it's trendy, it makes us look good to our investors.
Yeah.
Hiring is slowing, and having conversations and interviews with people, and even in companies where they're like, we're not laying people off because of AI, but if we can figure out how to get efficiency gains, we might slow down hiring. Entry level hiring has slowed. So we're really seeing the rise of like portfolio careers, solopreneurs, but it feels like it is no longer feasible necessarily to just work a 9 to 5. You may have to have a side gig.
Wow. What had started out, I think, for you and myself and maybe people in the audience with a portfolio career being a way to explore and dabble and grow is now shifted, and it's become something that people are turning to because of necessity, because this is the only way folks are seeing forward in this really difficult moment. Are there certain types of portfolio careers or certain paths that you're seeing people find more promising than others?
It's a good question. It's a hard one to answer because I think it just depends on the person, what their particular interests are, and what their skills are. Certainly, though, the advent of AI has made it possible for there to be more and more solopreneurs because AI can handle so much more work that would usually, you'd have to employ somebody. And now you don't necessarily have to do that. You can just set up shop and get going.
Yeah, absolutely. Now that portfolio careers are having a moment, unfortunately, out of necessity, do you think the career ladder is dead? Is it just sleeping?
I think the career ladder is still there, and it's kind of always been there in different forms, right? It's this idea of you start off as an apprentice, then you become a journeyman, and then eventually a master. So I think we're still going to see that progression, but I do have more questions about like how do we get on the career ladder? Is that possible? And what happens if you don't? And I suspect, when I think about it, I hadn't realized it until you framed it, but when I started as a writer, it was really like, okay, I just need to hone my skills and I'm just going to march towards whatever will get me closer to writing. And I wonder if that's going to become a more common path of like, I've been talking to a lot of people from Gen Z who didn't get a job straight out of college. And it's like, okay, you sort of take whatever you can get and try to use that experience to build your way somewhere. And I think maybe that the first few rungs of that ladder are broken. And what happens if you can't figure out some way to hoist yourself up through those broken rungs?
Right. And so that was a really cool framing, the way you described the career ladder as going from apprentice to journeyman to a master, because that shows a progression in skills. But it is a little different from the way I had thought about it, because the ladder I thought it was in terms of title, which is linked to compensation. But the skills can grow. And in a corporate environment, a lot of times if the skills grow in the linear fashion that the company rewards, that does link to higher compensation. But now we have something of a possible disconnect where you could be incredibly skilled, but whether you're trying to get on the first two rungs of the ladder or even stay higher up on the ladder, there's a certain element of figuring out how to commercialize, to sell those skills, and to be able to get the compensation that should match you on that particular part of the ladder. So I don't know either. I think we're always going to be in a moment of flux, and we're figuring it out as a society. And it is scary and it's hard, but work life is really taking the charge in terms of educating people, teaching people the new skills. And I've really enjoyed reading it. And I think, these moments where we get to talk about it are helping us all kind of figure it out together, because there's no easy answer. And given that there's no easy answer, I thought maybe we could transition to some of the lessons that you've learned as you've gone through your own experience of a portfolio career for somebody maybe who's just starting out. What was one of the hardest lessons that you learned?
That it's all worth it in the end. I think I had a lot of panic attacks when I was younger about like, this doesn't look like my dream career. Am I wasting my time? It was fascinating to me because I recently had a conversation with a young woman who just landed a job as a publicist in a publishing house, and she wanted to be a novelist. And she was like, am I wasting my time? And at her age, I would have killed to be a publicist at a publishing house. Like, sure, you're not an editorial, but like, you're still in the publishing house. That's a lot closer than the halls of the government. And so I realized like, oh, this is like, common to all of us. But the other thing was, at that time, I wasn't ready for my dream job. There was still just a lot I needed to learn in terms of how to write. And as I was talking to this young woman, I realized like she wasn't ready for, the dream job of sitting at home and working on the novel. And so a lot of times what might feel like you're wasting time or it's not the right place, you might be just on the stepping stone that's taking you to where you need to go.
Yeah. Yeah, wow. That really resonates for me, because I think there are moments where I wanted to, maybe my entire 20s and possibly half or all of my 30s, I wanted to just shortcut and get to the destination. But you need that foundation. You need to kind of have a broad base. You need to develop skills and relationships. And books honestly take time to marinate and to develop. So there are stepping stones, and sometimes the pace that we get is not the one that we had in mind. But as we go through it, a portfolio career really does prepare you to go into so many different directions and to be ready for that dream job with a different, stronger foundation than if you just went directly there. there's always a tension between building that foundation and then the advice that we get for careers, which is show up before you're ready. And we have to kind of toggle between doing both. Is there anything you would do differently if you were starting over?
I think just be more forgiving of myself, because to that earlier point, I was so frustrated when I was at the government of like, this does not look like being a writer. But what ended up happening is that government job gave me one of the most lucrative freelance gigs that I've ever had when I quit Fortune. Someone was just like, I need somebody to write about payment systems. And I was like, yes, what do you need to know? ACH, wow. I got you.
Wow.
And not only that, when they interviewed me for Fortune, one of their first questions was like, what do you know about business? And whenever somebody asks me something, my first instinct is like, I don't know. Luckily, I waited a second and I was like, I was at the government for 2 years at the Department of Treasury. And they were like, oh, you're fine. And I got no more questions about business. So it gave me a lot of things. And I think it's just, having the discipline to know when, okay, this is a stepping stone. I am pushing to get out. I'm looking for other opportunities. But for the moment, I am here and I might as well absorb everything I can because it will come in handy in some way or another later.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that really did help. I imagine it laid the foundation even beyond those 2 jobs to what you do at Fast Company. Being easy on ourselves does not come easy to me, but I think it's a work in progress and a great advice. If you're talking to somebody who's listening and that person is torn between their responsible career self and wanting to follow a more creative path, what advice would you give them?
¿Por qué no los dos? That's a tough one because, right, everybody, in my 20s, I would have said, follow your passions. Mm-hmm. Now in my 30s with a kid, there's a certain amount of like, yeah, stability, health insurance, paycheck. These are all important things. So I think it's just, how do you figure out a path where you can do both? I believe Arnold Schwarzenegger was recently in the news for giving this advice where he said, like, don't quit your day job. And they tell that to writers all the time. And I did not want to hear it in my 20s when I quit my day job. But, I think that's something I got really lucky that I was able to bounce out of that. But I should have had more of a plan.
Yeah. And that's interesting to know because in this particular economy, we already talked about how scary it is with the wave of layoffs and AI, and it makes day jobs feel all the more precious. But to look back on over a decade of career and say, okay, even the trend throughout is that there was value to the day job, even as you're pursuing something creative. That's something that the younger version of me probably would have needed to hear and would have very much rejected, but I think it would have been good advice, and it's well-earned advice. So thank you so much for that.
But yeah. I also want to say for someone who's listening who's like afraid of pursuing their passion, like do it. Like I don't regret leaving my first jobs. I don't regret leaving any of my jobs that got me to where I am.
Yeah. Sometimes jobs will force a choice, right? Like sometimes it's either or. Sometimes you can do a job in something else. And if it's either or, it depends on your circumstances. Can you take a risk in that moment? How much will you regret it? And it's also personal and so custom. But I think, yes, there is, the older you get, the more value you see in the day job, I guess.
I think, and especially like in my 20s, single, right? Take those risks. Right now, I want my health insurance for my kiddo.
Yeah. I'm sure kiddo appreciates it. Amazing. So now that we're wrapping up, are there any projects that you'd like to tell the audience about?
Ooh, I'm working on a couple book projects, but still feeling my way through them. But I have The Cycle and The Power of Trust if anyone's interested in checking them out.
Yes, and The Cycle is a memoir. It's really, really well written, of course, and very, very heartfelt. So I highly recommend that. Where on the internet can people find you?
I am online at www.shalenegupta.com. You can find me on Instagram or LinkedIn under the same name.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Shalene.
Thank you so much, Joy. This was a pleasure.